You're serious? I said, my voice trembling as I stared at Richard from across the living room. You want me to give you $3,000, on top of the $4,000 I already give you every month? He leaned back in his recliner, folding his arms over his chest like a king issuing an order. I need a new car, he said, his tone clipped and matter-of-fact. The old one's falling apart. I don't see what the big deal is. You've got the money. I felt my chest tighten. The big deal, Richard, is that I've already sacrificed enough for this household. I cover the bills, the groceries, your utilities. I even helped pay off Adam's credit cards. Now you want me to buy you a car? Yes, he said, his voice rising. Because I deserve it. I've done enough for this family. It's time for you to pull your weight. Pull my weight. The words hit me like a slap. I'd been financially supporting this household for years, working tirelessly to keep us afloat while my father-in-law and my husband, Adam, treated my paycheck like a bottomless ATM. And now, the one time I set a boundary, Richard had the audacity to call me selfish. I'm not doing it, I said firmly, standing my ground. You'll have to figure out another way. His face twisted with rage, the vein in his forehead bulging. You're just like your mother, always thinking you're better than everyone else. He stood abruptly, his movements sharp and aggressive. Don't you dare disrespect me in my own house. Your house? I shot back, my voice shaking. This house is paid for with my money, Richard. Before I could react, he lunged forward, shoving me with both hands. I felt my feet slip on the hardwood floor, and then I was tumbling down the stairs. The world blurred as pain shot through my body. I landed hard at the bottom, my arm twisted beneath me and my head pounding from the impact. For a moment, I couldn't move. The pain was overwhelming, and tears stung my eyes as I tried to catch my breath. Above me, Richard stood at the top of the stairs, his face still contorted with anger. That's what happens when you don't respect me, he spat, before turning and stomping back into the living room. I expected Adam to rush to my side, to help me up or at least ask if I was okay. But when he appeared at the top of the stairs, his expression was blank, almost bored. You should have just given him the money, Maya, he said with a shrug. You know how he gets. My name is Maya, and for the past 4 years I've been the financial backbone of a household that doesn't respect me. I married Adam because I thought we were building a life together, but it quickly became clear that his priorities were tied to his father, Richard. When Richard's health began to decline, I agreed to move into his home to help out. What I didn't realize was that helping out meant funding everything: rent, utilities, food, and even Richard's personal expenses. At first, I thought it was temporary. I told myself that Adam and Richard appreciated what I was doing, even if they didn't always say it. But as time went on, their sense of entitlement grew. Adam stopped working entirely, claiming he needed to be home to support his father. Richard, meanwhile, began making bigger and bigger demands, treating my paycheck like it belonged to him. Still, I stayed. I told myself it was for the good of the family. But lying at the bottom of those stairs, bruised and aching, I realized the truth. This wasn't a family. It was a one-sided arrangement where my value was measured solely by what I could give, and I was done. That night, I packed a bag. I didn't say a word to Adam or Richard as I grabbed my things and walked out the door. My heart pounded with a mix of fear and determination, the sting of their betrayal still fresh. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. I checked into a motel and sat on the edge of the bed, my phone clutched in my hands. I could feel the weight of what had just happened pressing down on me, but I wasn't going to let it break me. For years, I had been their safety net, their source of stability. Without me, they'd fall apart, and this time I wasn't going to catch them. The next morning, I made the call. Angela, I said when the lawyer answered, I need your help. It's about my husband and his father. Meeting Angela, my lawyer, felt like the first breath of fresh air I'd taken in years. She listened carefully as I explained everything, how I'd been covering all the household expenses, how Richard had demanded more money for a car, and how the confrontation had ended with me at the bottom of the stairs. You've been financially supporting your husband and father-in-law entirely on your own? Angela asked, raising an eyebrow. I nodded. For the past 4 years. Every bill, every expense, everything comes out of my pocket. And your name is on the mortgage or deed of the house? She asked, flipping through her notes. It's all in my name, I said, my voice firm. They couldn't qualify for the loan without me. I pay for it. I own it. Angela's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. Then this is your house, Maya, not theirs. We'll start with eviction papers for both of them. The thought of evicting Adam and Richard made my stomach churn with a mix of guilt and satisfaction. For years, I'd put their needs above my own, convincing myself that I was doing the right thing. But that night on the stairs, I realized that kindness and loyalty meant nothing to people who only saw me as a means to an end. What about Richard pushing me? I asked. He could have seriously hurt me. We'll include that in the lawsuit, Angela said firmly. You're not just evicting them, you're holding them accountable for their behavior. Let's make sure you get justice. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Angela helped me gather all the evidence I needed to support my case. Bank statements, receipts, even text messages where Richard and Adam made their entitled demands. Seeing everything laid out in black and white was both validating and infuriating. For years, I had convinced myself that I was overreacting, that things weren't as bad as they seemed. But the numbers didn't lie. I'd poured tens of thousands of dollars into that house while Adam and Richard contributed nothing but complaints and criticism. Angela also encouraged me to document the incident on the stairs. We'll need to show that there's a history of abusive or threatening behavior, she said. This isn't just about money. It's about creating a safe environment for you moving forward. Safe. The word hit me harder than I expected. For years, I'd put my safety, both emotional and physical, on the back burner, prioritizing the needs of others. Now, for the first time, I was fighting for myself. Meanwhile, I started making quiet plans to rebuild my life. I found a small apartment close to my job and began moving my things there in secret, one carload at a time. The house still felt like a minefield, and I avoided Adam and Richard as much as possible. Adam barely noticed my absence. He spent most of his time glued to the couch or arguing with his father about God knows what. Richard, meanwhile, was still fuming over my refusal to buy him a car. Every interaction with him felt like walking a tightrope, but I held my ground. The final piece of the puzzle was setting up the legal bombshell they'd never see coming. Angela drafted eviction papers which would force them to vacate the house within 30 days, and a civil lawsuit for damages related to the assault and financial exploitation. They're not going to take this well, she warned. Be prepared for some backlash. I'm ready, I said, my resolve hardening. They've pushed me around for too long. The hardest part was keeping my plans to myself. My coworkers noticed that I seemed distracted, but I brushed off their concerns with vague excuses about stress at home. The truth was, I felt like I was living a double life. One version of me was still playing the dutiful wife and daughter-in-law, while the other was quietly reclaiming her independence. Late at night, I'd lie awake in my new apartment, replaying everything that had happened. The anger and hurt would bubble up, threatening to overwhelm me. But then I'd think about the moment I'd serve them the papers. I pictured their faces, Richard's smug confidence shattering, Adam's indifference replaced with disbelief, and it gave me the strength to keep going. The day finally came. Angela met me at the house, her calm professionalism grounding me as we walked up the driveway. My heart raced as she rang the doorbell, the stack of papers in her hand feeling heavier than it should. Richard opened the door, his expression immediately souring when he saw me standing beside Angela. "What do you want?" he snapped. Angela didn't miss a beat. "Mr. Williams, you've been served," she said, handing him the papers. "You and your son are required to vacate this property within 30 days. Additionally, my client is filing a civil lawsuit against you for damages related to assault and financial exploitation." "What the hell is this?" Richard barked, his face turning red as he flipped through the documents. "You can't do this. This is my house." "No," I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. It's my house, and you're not welcome here anymore. Adam appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes like he'd just woken up. What's going on? He mumbled. Richard shoved the papers at him. Your wife thinks she can kick us out. Can you believe this? Adam skimmed the documents, his brow furrowing. Maya, this is insane. You can't just... I can, I interrupted, meeting his gaze. And I did. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The reality of the situation was sinking in, and I could see the panic starting to creep into their expressions. This wasn't just an argument they could brush off or a demand they could guilt me into meeting. This was real, and they couldn't stop it. Angela turned to leave, motioning for me to follow. They've been served, she said. Let's go. As I walked away, the weight of years of mistreatment seemed to lift from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt free. The house felt eerily quiet as I sat in my car parked across the street, watching Angela walk up to the door one final time. She'd insisted on being the one to deliver the formal lawsuit and eviction enforcement notice. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment when Richard and Adam would finally realize the gravity of what they had done. I saw Angela ring the doorbell and stand confidently with the papers in hand. Moments later, Richard opened the door, his expression shifting from irritation to confusion, and finally to pure, unadulterated rage. Even from my car, I could hear his voice erupt. This is ridiculous, he bellowed, his fists clenched at his sides. She can't do this to me. I've lived in this house for years. Angela's voice remained calm and professional. Mr. Williams, as I explained the last time we served you, this property belongs solely to my client, Maya. You've had your 30-day notice, and as of today, you are legally required to vacate. Any refusal to comply will result in further legal action. Adam appeared behind him, his hair disheveled and his face still puffy with sleep. He squinted at the papers Angela handed him and groaned. Maya, seriously? What is all this? Angela didn't flinch. This is a civil lawsuit for damages totaling $20,000, including compensation for the physical assault, financial exploitation, and emotional distress caused by both Mr. Williams and Mr. Adam Williams. These proceedings will move forward regardless of whether you vacate today. Richard's face turned beet red, and I could see the anger boiling over. He snatched the papers from Adam's hands and ripped them in half, tossing the pieces onto the porch. You think this is going to scare me? He shouted. You can't evict family. This is my house. Angela didn't blink. That's for the court to decide, Mr. Williams. But for now, the sheriff's department will be here shortly to ensure that the eviction is carried out. Richard slammed the door in her face, but not before I caught a glimpse of Adam standing behind him, wide-eyed and panicked. For the first time, he seemed to grasp that this wasn't just another argument that could be smoothed over. This was real, and there was no way out. Angela returned to the car, her steps purposeful as she slid into the passenger seat. They're fuming, she said with a wry smile. But I doubt they'll try anything stupid. The sheriff will handle it from here. I exhaled a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. For years, I'd been the one stuck in the cycle of giving in, of letting their entitlement, abuse, and disregard wear me down. But now, for the first time, I was the one holding the power. It felt foreign, but it also felt good. As we waited for the sheriff, I allowed myself to imagine the scene inside the house. Richard pacing furiously, ranting about how unfair this all was. Adam probably slumped on the couch, scrolling through his phone to avoid engaging. Their dynamic had always been the same. Richard barking orders, Adam following along, and me cleaning up the mess. But not anymore. When the sheriff's car pulled up, Richard stormed outside, yelling at the officers about how he'd been wronged. She's lying, he shouted. This is my house. I've lived here for decades. She can't just throw me out like this. The lead officer calmly reviewed the paperwork Angela handed him. This property is legally in Ms. Maya's name, and these eviction proceedings are valid, he said firmly. You've been given ample notice, Mr. Williams. You need to gather your belongings and vacate immediately." "I won't!" Richard roared, his voice hoarse with fury. "You'll have to drag me out of here." Adam finally stepped outside, holding a hastily packed duffel bag. He looked at me from across the street, his face a mixture of anger and confusion. "Why are you doing this, Maya?" he called out. "We're family." That word, family, cut through me like a knife. They'd used it as a weapon for years, twisting its meaning to justify their entitlement and disrespect, but I refused to let it hold me hostage any longer. I stepped out of the car, meeting Adam's gaze with a calm I didn't know I had. "Family doesn't push you down the stairs," I said, my voice steady. "Family doesn't take your money and treat you like you owe them everything. This house is mine, my life is mine, and I won't let either of you take anything more from me." Richard shouted something incoherent from the porch, but I didn't hear him. My focus was on Adam, who stared at me for a long moment before finally lowering his eyes. For once, he had no comeback, no excuses. He slung the duffel bag over his shoulder and trudged down the driveway without another word, his father still fuming behind him. The sheriff's officers escorted Richard back inside to gather his belongings, and Angela placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You've done it," she said quietly. "This chapter is over." As I watched Adam and Richard leave the house for the last time, I felt a surge of emotions, relief, pride, and an overwhelming sense of freedom. This wasn't just a victory in court, it was a victory for myself. For the first time in years, I'd stood up to the people who had tried to diminish me, and I'd won. I turned to Angela, a small smile tugging at my lips. "Let's go," I said. "I've got a life to rebuild." The house felt so much larger once Richard and Adam were gone. As I walked through the quiet rooms, I was struck by how different everything seemed. Without their constant presence, the space that had once felt suffocating now felt like a blank canvas, a place I could finally reclaim as my own. The sheriff had left a short while ago, taking with him the last traces of their entitlement. Richard had resisted until the very end, ranting about how unfairly he'd been treated, but there was nothing left for him to cling to. Adam had been quieter, a shadow of the man who'd once promised to build a life with me. Watching him leave, dragging his duffel bag down the driveway, had been bittersweet. I felt no anger anymore, only pity. Angela stayed with me as I locked the front door. "You've done something not many people have the courage to do," she said, her tone warm. "It's hard to walk away from people you've invested so much in, even when they don't deserve it." I nodded, her words sinking in. "I think I finally realized it wasn't just about the money," I said. "It was about taking back control. For years I let them make me feel like I didn't have a choice, like I owed them everything. But I don't owe them anything." Over the next few days, I began to rebuild my life, piece by piece. I changed the locks on the house and hired a cleaning service to help scrub away the physical reminders of Richard and Adam's presence. It felt symbolic, almost therapeutic, to erase the mess they'd left behind. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a stranger in my own home. Friends and coworkers reached out to check on me, offering words of encouragement and support. "You're amazing for standing up for yourself," Lily said over coffee one afternoon. "It would have been so easy to just keep putting up with it, but you didn't." "I think I just reached a breaking point," I admitted. When Adam told me I should have given Richard the money, I realized he didn't care about me at all. And if he didn't care, then why was I giving so much of myself to him? Lily nodded. "It's hard to see that when you're in it, but you're out now. That's what matters." Richard and Adam tried to contact me once, but I ignored their calls. Angela assured me that they had no legal grounds to challenge the eviction or the lawsuit. "You've already won," she said, and I believed her. For the first time in years, I felt untouchable. My focus shifted to the future. I started exploring new career opportunities and hobbies I'd put on hold for far too long. Without the weight of their demands, I had the time and energy to invest in myself. I even began considering selling the house, my house, and moving somewhere new, somewhere that didn't carry the ghosts of the past. One evening, as I sat on the patio with a glass of wine, I let myself reflect on the journey that had brought me here. It hadn't been easy, far from it. But every step, every painful moment, had taught me something about my own strength. I'd spent years letting others define my worth, but not anymore. I looked out at the quiet street, the stars just beginning to dot the sky. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. This was my life, and I was finally living it on my terms. A few months later, my life had completely transformed. The house I once shared with Richard and Adam no longer felt like a prison. It was mine now, truly mine. Every corner, every room, reflected the life I was rebuilding for myself. The walls that used to echo with their demands and entitlement were now filled with peace and quiet. I'd finally put the house on the market, a decision that felt symbolic of closing that chapter for good. Angela helped me navigate the legal and financial hurdles, and the lawsuit against Richard was progressing in my favor. The compensation I stood to gain wasn't just about the money, it was about holding him accountable. Knowing that he would face consequences for his actions was its own kind of closure. In my new apartment, everything felt lighter. Without the constant burden of their expectations weighing me down, I finally had the time and energy to focus on myself. I took up yoga, started painting again, and even planned a trip to a quiet coastal town I'd always wanted to visit. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living, not just surviving. The people in my life noticed the change. "You look happier," Lily said during one of our coffee dates. "Like a weight's been lifted." "Because it has," I said with a smile. "For years I thought walking away meant giving up. But now I realize it was the bravest thing I've ever done." She raised her cup in a mock toast. "To brave new beginnings." "To never settling for less," I added, clinking my cup against hers. Richard and Adam's absence no longer haunted me. I stopped replaying the events of that night on the stairs or wondering if I'd done the right thing. I knew I had. They'd tried to make me feel small, but in the end, their actions had only made me stronger. I didn't need their apologies or explanations to move on. I'd built a new life, one they had no part in, and that was enough. The lawsuit's final judgment came a few weeks later. Richard was ordered to pay damages, and though I doubted he'd ever willingly accept responsibility, the ruling gave me closure. It was a legal acknowledgement of everything I'd endured, a confirmation that my story mattered. On the day I handed over the keys to the house's new owners, I stood in the empty living room one last time, letting the memories wash over me. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal. It was all still there, but it no longer controlled me. I had taken back my power, and in doing so, I had found myself again. As I stepped outside and closed the door behind me, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The road ahead was open and full of possibilities, and for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see where it would lead. This wasn't just the end of one chapter, it was the beginning of a story entirely my own,